So today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Adrian Pyne to the show. Adrian is the author of this book, Agile Beyond IT. Sorry, I've got it too close to me screen. There we go. It says on the back of it, so it must be true. He's a project professional for over 30 years, has led changes in 11 industries and in the public sector in the UK and abroad. The author of books on program management and agile governance and assurance. He has contributed to the evolution of program, portfolio and PMO standards and is a regular speaker, visiting lecturer, blogger and researcher. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Thank you very much. What a glowing tribute there. My goodness. I could have written it myself.
It does. I doubt you could have done better yourself. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's amazing how these bios are really good for people. And as you say, it's printed on the back of a book, so it must be true. Tell us a little bit more about you. Beyond that, where you're from. People will probably guess from your accent where you're from, but from a country point of view.
From a country point of view, yeah, I'm from England. I grew up on the edge of southeast London, or as it probably should have been, south East London. But I think my parents made sure my brother and I never spoke like that. So there we go. Right. These days though, I live in Dorset, in a very nice little village.
Beautiful.
In West Dorset, which is really, really nice. There with my partner of nearly 31 years, who's a retired architect, and both he and I love gardening. So we got a very big garden and a bit of a field, and planted a few hundred trees over the last sort of 10, 11 years. And we got loads of fantastic walks, and we like going off on holidays to sort of do walking in sort of Wales or various other places around the UK. I think both of us not doing, COVID or no, not doing a great deal in terms of foreign travel, because both of us have spent quite a lot of our professional lives traveling in various places around the world. So my partner's built buildings in sort of Saudi Arabia to bits of Europe and all over the UK, and I've worked in various places around the world, in the States and everything. So these days we prefer to, at least at the moment, staying a bit closer to home, and love touring around the UK.
Well, I'm very fortunate. I live just on the Welsh border, up on the north of Wales in Shropshire, and as you say, you go it. For me, it's an hour's drive to go to different parts of Wales. It's astounding. Where you live down there in that area is astounding, and this country has got so much to give, especially if you want to go outdoors and stuff. It's just an astounding place. And it's funny when you say that about the travelling and stuff. I remember, I've not been very much of an international traveller, but I remember a similar sort of thing that when I was working for Oracle a few years back, where I was consultant project manager, so I was travelling a lot. Most days I was away, I was staying in London, staying in hotels and doing that sort of thing. And then I'd kind of go away with my other half, and we'd go to a hotel for a weekend, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't want another frigging Caesar salad, to be quite honest.
I know what you mean. I do. And,
I do like a Caesar salad.
Where you are, we were actually just outside Oswestry only about 2-3 weeks ago.
So that's where I live.
There you go. So do you know the Penydifferin?
The Penydifferin, yeah.
Penydifferin.
Yes.
So,
yeah, been there. I can't remember whose birthday.
Fantastic walking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I live in a little village called Pant, which is on its way out into Wales. So you're heading out towards Welshpool along the A483. So yeah, you were literally in spitting distance from my house then. There you go.
Good.
Well, that's good. I love this area. Born and bred here, and I stay here. So
Right.
So yeah. So
I started out. One of the first, I guess, bits of business travel I ever had to do, because I started out in BT. Back in '86, and in the very, very early days of quite primitive networks, I started out in IT and BT. and I had to come up to. BT had a big and slightly secret place in Oswestry. Had a control centre in
Yeah.
Oswestry, and
At Park Hall, wasn't it?
yeah, that's right. And it had some subterranean levels, which were, at least I was told whether it's true or not, because it's no longer there. It was sort of a emergency control center if the bomb ever dropped. So because I know there were sort of buttons on the lift that you had to have a lock and a code in order to be able to operate.
Wow.
And they never let me down there. Sensible people.
You're sure it just wasn't fancy toilets or anything like that?
I don't know. I mean, they could have been just pulling my leg, but I think they're about -4 levels. I was like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me because obviously Park Hall Camp there, and we're going back at history of Oswestry there, and this would change this podcast too now. Park Hall Camp, where that building was an army barracks for many, many years, military army barracks. My dad was based there and ended up staying around this area, so back in the Second World War. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. And then when you look over towards Welshpool, towards Criggan, there was a radio telescope that's not a radio telescope, a radio antenna that was for the Polaris submarines, was either redundancy or the major communication. So it makes sense that you might have some of that stuff in and around the area. But, yeah. So for anyone who wants to come to Shropshire, you can. It's a lovely place, and Oswestry is amazing as well. So So we're not going to talk about that. Yeah, we're not going to talk about it. It's interesting though that working with BT, because obviously IT within BT and our conversation today, a bit off the back of your book, but actually I kind of want to go back a little bit before that, a little bit, and say. And here's a question. I hope it won't be too bad. Agile is a emotive subject in many fields. It's the one topic that when I look on LinkedIn, I can see quite a few diverse opinions, and I have some joy watching them sometimes, and occasionally chip in what I think. Not that I'm utterly qualified for it, but I have an opinion. So let's start with what I think is probably a key thing. What is Agile?
I'm kind of with another Adrian on this one. First of all, I prefer to try and use the word agility rather than agile, because that, and it's not just a bit of semantics. It's trying to get away from the almost religious discussion and attitudes that some people have around agile with a big A. And some folk, especially from a kind of an IT background, can get rather protective of agile and say you can't, it came out of software, Agile Manifesto, can't do anything else with it, and if you try and do it, you're a heretic and we should burn you at the stake. And stuff, and then there's other folk that have say I take agile, and they say I'm being agile in my organisation. And 10 or 11, 12 years ago, I started to say, well, what do you mean? Because I get the Agile Manifesto, and which I personally think is the most coherent definition or description of what agility means. And yeah, you can kind of boil it down into it means flexibility and it means doing just enough of something. And as in fact I wrote in response to a bit of someone's blog today, and I was agreeing with something they were saying. They said, just enough doesn't mean leaving stuff out. It means you do just enough. It's like, great tennis players, people, from in the kind of era that I used to sort of still playing a bit of tennis, sort of Bjorn Borg or the great players of today, Nadal, they don't move around the tennis court any more than they need to. Their job is to make the other person move around and stuff. And so, so they don't play more tennis than they absolutely have to. And to me, that's kind of, when I started looking at the Agile Manifesto years ago, and I thought to myself, well, hang on a second, if I take away the pure IT bit of this, or take it out of an IT context, this describes how I work. You know, I'm always focusing on value, and most great project professionals focus on value, which is, I've got to say, it's different from when I started out in projects back in the 80s, back in sort of the late-ish 80s. And then all the training courses said projects are about producing stuff. You do stuff with them. You start in, it has the usual sort of time, cost, quality, however you want to define the three parameters.
Yeah.
But they're there to produce stuff. And that never sat right with me way back then. And I thought, well, hang on a second. Well, yes, projects produce stuff, but why do they produce stuff? And the answer is that, to actually get some benefit out of it. And that's where I started coming from. When I first was in the mid-90s, and I was starting to work as a consultant and putting together project management capabilities in organizations, I started from the standpoint of, why are we doing projects? And what do we need to get out of the projects? And that's how we measure whether a project is successful or not. Is it delivering some kind of benefit? Is it delivering some kind of value? So the whole value basis of agility, which is absolutely at its core, is great for me. It's not new. Again, it's another reason why I like to use the word agility, because agility has been with us an awful long time. I recognize not just myself, but a lot of other professionals of my advanced age, sort of around retirement and gone retirement, as having exhibited agility for decades, even before someone wrote down and said what agility actually looked for. So way before 2001, and so it's been with us a long time. It just so happens that a group of amazing people sat down and came up with the Agile Manifesto. And then you can take the Agile Manifesto, which was absolutely about developing software. And I realized, again, 10, 11, 12 years ago, well, actually, you can take this and you can apply it in other areas, which lots of people have done. And it's been applied in marketing and engineering, product development, well beyond the software, and even construction, and of course project management. I've even seen and written a report about an agile nuclear engineering program, or put it another way, a nuclear engineering program that was done in an agile way. And they didn't know it at the time. They said, come and do a review of this program. And I did. And I said, do you realize how you've gone about running this and the freedom you've been given to come up with the solutions, some really tricky technical solutions to a huge nuclear engineering problem that they were dealing with. And they were the only people in the world who could actually tackle that problem. So they were given the authority to actually come up with solutions with people looking over their shoulder, but that's fine, but not people on their shoulder and on their back all the time. It was a classic piece of agile behavior, not just in the team, but from the organizational landscape and the around them. And I talk to people and I say, oh yeah, agile nuclear engineering, and they go, no, you cannot possibly do nuclear engineering agile. Well, there you go, there's one. So,
yeah, it's funny because
there's a rambling answer for you. Yeah. So what is agility? Focus on value, flexibility, and doing just enough.
Yeah,
that's
which is really easy to think about, isn't it? And I think the pseudo-religious behaviours of some, or maybe it's not the behaviours, it's some of the things that, and I might have been a little bit guilty, having done a Scrum Master course of getting really annoyed with people who are saying we're agile, and then I sit there going, but you're not doing this and you're not doing that, so therefore you are not. And it kind of, in recent months or years, I've kind of sat there and gone, well, actually, isn't that you've got those core fundamentals that you're talking about there, and actually the tools that you use, or the methodology, in quotes, that you use. I suppose the thing is, it's like Scrum. If you're not doing stand-ups, are you doing Scrum? Well, you can still be agile, but not be doing. And it's about using those tools to support it in a way that suits what you need, and being agile in how you use those tools. And it's kind of sit there and going, right, we're using a Kanban board, brilliant, superb, right, it's not working for us because we've done a retrospective, we've worked out that using that Kanban board isn't working because what we're trying to do at the moment doesn't lend itself. We haven't broken it down to enough tasks for us to. So how do we do it differently? But that doesn't necessarily mean you're not using agility to do that. And in fact, you're using agility to re-engineer that. I think, and I think I mentioned to you earlier. I've seen it with. I've tried to use what I describe as not being agile, but where I've seen things where people put things. Oh, we're going to deliver this in an agile framework with capital A. And I've kind of changed it, say, no, we're going to use agile methodologies or agile techniques to deliver it, which is what's really happening from what I'm seeing in there. And it's kind of, but again, even then, sometimes I'm being a bit picky and pedantic because I suppose it's the capital and the little a, which is the bit that draws the question.
I'm not so sure you are being sort of picky and pedantic because, you know, it is a kind of key question. Can you be a bit agile? And I mean, the simple answer is yes. And I've seen loads of examples of projects sometimes not projects, sometimes just software developments, or sometimes projects, sometimes other things, where they say, you know, we're using agility. And I'm thinking, when I look at how they're working, and I'm thinking, well, you're using a bit of agility. And the answer is, yeah, you can get some value out of that. But the whole point is, with the whole of the set of the Agile principles for the Agile Manifesto and the 4 values, is that you get the value, you get the highest and greatest value out of applying all of those values and all of those principles. And another thing which I've seen, which is also probably true, there probably is a tipping point where you're not being enough agile to get any value at all, and in fact you start getting anti-agile. And I've certainly taken part in a lot of, I don't know, shall we say, blog discussions where people say, oh, you've got anti-patterns going on, anti-agile going on, and that is and that is true. When someone says, I guess the best example of that, or most common I think I've seen, is where teams are trying to do agility inside a team, inside a project, and everything in the organizational landscape around it is killing it. So an agile team is supposed to basically have all the people in the team it needs, the right subject matter experts, the right technical people, da-da-da-da-da. If you simply have got a team where the organization is refusing to give the right, the subject matter experts, for example, with the right capability, and even if it does, not empowering those to make the decision, even though they've got all the knowledge and experience they need, then you're killing the agility. Because the whole point of agility is to do things faster and deliver value faster. That's really what it kind of boils down to. The idea is, you can still, in lots of other techniques with waterfall software development approaches, you can still deliver value. Can you deliver it faster? And the big attraction that, in fact, I think it says so on the Agile Manifesto pages, is that we're about delivering working software faster. I think that's one of the big drivers for them. And so if you do it properly, you can potentially get that benefit, probably more often than not. So there does come a point where if someone's being only a bit agile, then in the areas that they're not being a bit agile, how damaging, how anti-agile are those areas? And it kind of brings me into another area which I recognise around projects. Now, something that I kind of observed probably 25 years ago is, and it's something which actually still only very recently has been reflected in what people would call good practice or best practice. So writings by the PMI, APM and the like. And that is that projects have always been written about as being successful because of what goes on inside the project, or the program, or the portfolio. And that is, of course, true. But there's another dimension, and that is the organizational environment, the hinterland around a project. And again, it's an example like I just gave. The number of times as a project professional myself, I've had to go battling to get resources that have been promised when the project's in mobilization and they just never materialize, or people who are just not experienced enough, or simply not getting, although the funding is promised, that never materializes, or it's not enough, or it gets slowed down. And half the time, a project manager can find themselves battling against the organization to keep their project alive, let alone successful. So you've got a two-dimensional thing here. On the one hand, projects are successful or not because of what goes on inside them and the effectiveness of the team, its leadership, etc. But also the environment around the project, its hinterland, is the other dimension. And unfortunately, in most organizations, projects are like viruses. They're tacked on, they're not business as usual. And because of that very nature, they're not business as usual, so they don't get the attention. Part of that is, and we could be opening up massive cans of worms here, but I'll say why it's particularly important for agility, is because at board level, most people on boards don't get projects because they don't come from a projects background. They come from a BAU background. They are accountants, they're lawyers, they're engineers, they're techie people, they're marketing people, whatever they happen to be. And there's nothing wrong with that or their experience whatsoever. But in these days of increasing projectization, and PMI have written and produced huge evidence about the increasing projectization of work, projects are moving more and more into the operation. They're moving more and more into the business as usual. If you've got leadership at the top of the organization that doesn't understand 50% of what the organization does, that's a recipe for a huge amount of wasted investment. So, why that's important? Go on, carry on.
I was going to say it boils to that as a project manager that's always sat there, that project sponsorship, that project support for each project, and proper project sponsorship, because one of the things I've read before now is around having sponsors when you have a project sponsor, and I didn't get a chance to put it about one bit of advice to give a project sponsor on Jonathan Norman's Pyne the other day would have been, I was going to do it and I forgot to register, but the thought I had was actually get trained in understanding projects as a project sponsor, so you understand where your role fits and how you fit in with that project manager. And as you say, those BAU people, understanding what's expected of them, understanding what, and being available for that project manager is a bit that, as you say, that causes a massive, again, it kind of brings me back to, I've been reading Tammy Watchorn's book, one of your fellow stable authors, and just the things she talks about getting stuff done despite the organisation, really, in her book, from the way I'm reading it, and I think that is what we do find ourselves sometimes, isn't it? It's because this is the right thing to do, it needs to be done, and everyone wants you to do it, but no one's acting as if they do, and it just, that sponsorship, real sponsorship, not I'm the SRO, I'm the project sponsor, yes, I'm the one who signs the checks, and then that's it. There's so much more that's needed from them.
Absolutely, and quite often project professionals will find themselves negotiating with the senior manager who is the project sponsor, who is the SRO, for how much of their time they're going to have. Interestingly enough, several years ago, I was asked to go and do some work with the top management team of a particular business school. And they said, we're having problems because all of us in the top management team, we are all sponsors for particular change projects in and around the business school, and we're challenged in that role. And so I went in and did some discussion with them collectively and individuals, and it soon became clear that, not surprisingly, as very senior people in a very good business school, they knew exactly up there what an SRO role was about, a sponsorship role was about. They absolutely got that. They absolutely understood that. What they didn't have was the time to do it because they had incredibly busy day jobs. So actually we turned it round, and the piece of work I did with them was working out, not for, if you like, that financial year, because they were just on a treadmill and couldn't change it. It says, right, for the future years, let's work out a way that gives you collectively and individually the space to do your, let's say, business as usual roles and your project facing roles. And that's what that piece of work ended up all about. And that apparently seemed to work very, very well. Certainly the next year, and after that, I wasn't involved anymore. So seemed to be okay. And so they had to actually find a way of changing almost their business as usual, because they were having to speak. They could no longer tenably have projects as something they fitted into 5 minutes a day, which was a crazy thing to do. They were far too important to the business school. So they actually had to be somehow fitted into the let's not call it the business as usual, let's call it the operation. So projects as part of the operation. And that's increasingly where I get from these days.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because I recently did a bit of refresher training on strategy, and it's something I've been looking at and as an area that I need to, because I've always thought that I do think ahead, and in my role I try to look beyond the next delivery sort of thing, and generally managing teams of people. And it makes me wonder whether actually you've got strategy, which is these leaders in those organisations, that's where you really want them spending a lot of their time thinking about the way down the future for their particular area of expertise, those lawyers, those accountants, those marketing people. And then the next part of their role is, as you say, is the operations, actually keeping things going. But the bit that sits in the middle, that takes us from strategy and then puts it into operation, is projects, isn't it? Projects is the realisation of the strategy into the operational environment.
Well, it's what projects, in the modern kind of era, were invented for. And that is, and it's also why program management evolved really in the early 1990s, because the size and complexity and the frequency of change was increasing and increasing and increasing, and project management couldn't cope. It couldn't cope with the complexity of stuff that was being thrown in its direction, which is why program management evolved. And then the sheer frequency and numbers of change initiatives, you then had to gather those together, which is really where portfolio management emerged. And I was back in the day with the late and much lamented or missed guru of program management, Jeff Rees. he led ProgM, which was APM's program management SIG. And for many years, as well as program management, because all these other ideas were floating around, ProgM flew the flag for portfolio management and PMO, the development of understanding of PMOs within APM, until other people came along and said, we need to actually develop this much further, and they took it on, and there were separate SIGs, and which is fantastic. That's exactly what needed to happen. So, but you had that clear evolution path in response to what was happening. But now we've got this thing where, as I say, you've got projects increasingly moving into the operation. And that's different from what I saw happening 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And that has absolutely far more impact on an organization than, shall we say, change projects and programs, which have arguably been peripheral for many years, if not decades. So given that, and that's another thing which piqued my interest in agility, because I started to see that because agility is 50% agile, 50% behavioral, or roughly, it's hard, it's as much behavioral as it is process, and that again is pretty much unlike any other aspect of method that I've used over the years. In fact, the people side of project management didn't even really start to emerge until well into the 1990s with APM body of knowledge. You didn't get much in the way of the behavioral stuff in PMI bodies of knowledge until the 2000s and stuff. But PMI are on the ball these days, far more with that stuff, and are leading in many ways. But it wasn't there then, and so with the organisational dimension of it, which PMI have written a lot about and researched a lot about, and APM as well. You've got to say, well, okay, so how do you create an organisation that is supportive of projects? And to me, agility is a model for that, because it's got all the principles and the values for that. It's got the behavioral stuff, it's got the process side of it. It's got all those principles and values already built in. What needed to happen, and this is what drove me to write the book really, was nobody, to my mind, had really stepped back and said, let's forget about IT projects, forget about IT. What does agility itself look like when applied to the whole of project management, not just inside a project, but also the organizational side of it? I was sitting around the project. How do you make projects thrive? And that to me was the key differentiator. Lots of fantastic books out there from PMI, Agile Business Consortium in particular, around Agile project and program and portfolio management. But even they focus mostly on IT-enabled stuff. And I just wanted to get away from that and say, let's look and see what any project might look like if you apply agility to it. And to my mind then, once you've done that, you can say, you can use that as a model for building an organization that's friendly to projects. Other models are available, but here's one, and I think it works.
Yeah, makes sense. It's funny because so it's because it piqued my interest, this the title of your book, Beyond IT, for a number of reasons. It was one from the point of view of thinking of it as in infrastructure projects, That was where my first brain went. Yeah, building a bridge, building a thing. And I'm thinking, how agile can you be in something like that? And then obviously you just said there about projects that aren't developing software, and everything's becoming projectized, and it's the thing that it took me a long time to get this agile thing. Still not convinced I'm completely understanding of everything yet, but I may be not alone. But it kind of looked at it, and I look at my say, and it can be an IT program, it can be anything, but you've got and you've used the word, so I'll use it. So waterfall. We've got a project where we've got to deliver something, and it's the thing that I struggle with sometimes is that we've got something to be delivered here. It has to be delivered here. We don't want any bits early. We just want something delivered here. And traditionally, you'd go, right, let's say it's a building. You're going to decide what you want, design it, fabricate it, build it, do QA maybe for whatever reason, getting signed off, and it's gone live. But then I look at actually what you do when you think about building something like that. Well, you put your footings in, and someone checks the footings are okay, don't they? And then you build the walls, and someone checks the walls are okay. Maybe not in a formal, but an informal manner. Then you do electrics. You have a professional who does the electrics check, and you have the plug. And you have these little iterative bits that get signed off potentially through the construction of a building. And if it's a bridge, or you'll have phases in there that sit within maybe a development phase. You may have designed it in that waterfall fashion, but in your design, when you've got and I'll take an architect, you've got an architect working with the client, coming up with a design team, thinking of 15 different, what about using this material for this roof? Well, we don't know whether that'll work. Let's prove it. Let's do a proof of concept. Oh, that doesn't work. And again, you're in that agile capability, and it's agility within. You can be absolutely agile in a waterfall-like delivery. It's what, and I always saw it as this iterative approach in all of those sections, and that's where I was coming from originally, and trying to think what was new about it, and I couldn't quite square it out in my mind.
There's a bit of a risk there, and unfortunately, it's a trap that lots fall into. I'm not saying you have, but it is a trap lots fall into, and that. Agility is not defined by an iterative life cycle. In fact, the Agile Manifesto, the Agile principles, don't mention the word iteration. They merely say you should deliver value regularly, deliver stuff regularly to the client, which may imply iteration. It doesn't have to. And it's one of the biggest problems that when people are trying to apply agility to running a project, because most agile software development approaches are based on an iterative cycle, like Scrum, with its repeated sprints, there is an assumption made that you have to have an iterative life cycle if you're going to do a project in an agile way. That doesn't even make sense to me, because if you then turn that on its head, what that means is that the only time you can do a project with agility is if it requires and should have an iterative life cycle. No other projects can possibly be done agile. And that doesn't even make sense, as well as I can point physically to dozens of projects and programs that have waterfall life cycles, mixtures, especially in programs. I've run goodness knows how many programs or set them up where a program has got a number of projects in it, Some of those projects are doing waterfall life cycles. Some of them are doing iterative life cycles. It's whatever is necessary to the project. And it comes back to the point again, the reason I read the book, because there's an awful lot more to project management than a life cycle. So there's risks, there's issues, there's finance, there's document control, there's leadership, there's stakeholder management, communication, change control, There's an awful lot more to project management than a life cycle. So to define agility and agile project management in terms of a life cycle, and worse, to then say you can only have an agile project if you've got an iterative life cycle, I won't use the B word, but it's really stupid. But it's a mistake a lot of people make, and a lot of proselytizing agilists say no, an agile project has to have an iterative life cycle, and they don't question that. And they may as well say the Earth is flat. Well, you can say it, but it's really easy to prove it isn't true.
Yeah, can we drill down on that just to give my brain a thing? So, where you say an agile piece of work doesn't need to be iterative, because when I think it, maybe I'm using the wrong words with iterative, but when I think of that, I think of you will build something and you'll release it. You'll build something, you'll release it, and that's what that delivering that early value is. It sounds like from what we just said there, that's different in the concept the way you think you're talking about it, in the fact that it's I don't know how to put it into words. It's kind of how do you explain that non-iterative agile delivery? Give it an example, say, something like that, to kind of bring it.
Let me give an example. A number of years ago, I was asked to help set up and get going one of the biggest programs, change programs, one of our supermarkets had ever done, and they were, I've got to say, their senior management were amazing. They said, look, this may be the biggest single change program we've ever done, but we're going to empower it. We want the whole thing managed in an agile way, and we're going to empower you to do so. This particular supermarket, they actually had a pretty mature and effective internal project management capability. So they had some great professionals already who were very, very used to their very, in terms of management capability, management maturity model. They were easily sort of level 3.5, almost level 4 in most areas of their project management capability. They're really good at projects. And they said, no, we're going to do this one agile, and they really did the empowerment stuff. So this program, and it had one of the two biggest projects in it was a agile software development project, and that was done using Scrum. And in point of fact, we defined 3 Scrum teams working in parallel to scale the level of development required in the time that the company wanted it done. So we had 3 Scrum teams. And that was quite interesting backlog prioritization and management, I can tell you.
Yeah.
So that was fun. So that was definitely with an iterative life cycles in those, because they were using Scrum and sprints.
Yeah.
Then there was an engineering piece that was modifying some bought-in kit, off-the-shelf kit, and that was done waterfall to do that. We come out to the software bit for the moment. Because we had to scale this up, and there were going to be, we planned for 3 phases of implementation, or 3 phases of development, leading to 3 separate implementations staggered about 3 months apart. But that meant that we were not going live with any software for the first one was 6 months. So we were doing a sprint, and we had working software tested, and then it was basically banked. And then the next one, and next one, bank all that software. None of it going live. Of course, because of the scale of what we were doing, there was a lot of integration testing to do, system testing to do, and stuff. Which, again, an awful lot of people, when they get hooked on, I'm producing working software out of my scrums, completely forget that usually, especially in biggish organizations, it's got to go into some kind of release testing before, not many Scrum teams have the luxury of producing working software that then immediately goes live without any other intervention. That just doesn't happen very often. So it's, what they're coming up with is actually working software, not live software. That's different. And that's what we did. We banked this stuff. So for 6 months, we did not have anything live until we were ready to go with the first implementation. And that was it. So so we're still working on iterative stuff. And fortunately, it was done very well by really capable people. So we didn't have much rework when it went off into integration testing, release testing, and all of those other fine things. We didn't have much stuff thrown back over the wall saying, no, you need to make these changes, otherwise it's going to cause problems in live operation because it'll interfere with this stuff over here and stuff. And which was good. I'm pleased to say. But so it wasn't a pure iterative thing. We had to, if you like, be agile and adapt how we used scrums in order to actually say what's the best way to go live and stuff. And there was there was an initial thing that says, are we going to use waterfall to get to our first 6 months? And we just turned and said, no, we actually want to have the confidence of having modules of software that we know are tested and functionally do and perform as they're supposed to. And that was a big confidence boost, that we had these things that we knew would work when they went live if they didn't interfere with something else. And that was brilliant, and that was absolutely appropriate to use that as opposed to waterfall. It was, if you like, a kind of waterfall, because we just banked all of that lot until we were ready to go live, and then we went live with the whole lot. So.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I can see, and I've tried to do things like this and kind of been challenged both in my own head and by other people, where I've kind of gone. We were doing some testing one time where it was application virtualization, and we were testing stuff, and we were having to test it, remediate it, put it out, and the way I put it in was we didn't know which ones didn't work. So we didn't know which ones needed remediation. So we had to go through the processes of working out which ones did, and then they'd go into the backlog for the ones that were going to be remediated, then they go to remediation, then we'd have to work out what remediation was needed. But you had the phases of, right, this batch we're going to drop into the evaluation, this batch we'll get into the working out what we're going to do it, then get them resolved, then bring it into the testing. And very similar to what you said there was I kind of controlled them in a similar manner, but I was kind of challenged back a couple of times with going, that's not agile, or that's not waterfall. And I had that endemic issue, and I don't know how you get that. I've had quite a lengthy conversation with someone saying, but when will the stuff in the sprint be finished? And it's kind of like, oh, sorry, when will the sprint finish? And it's kind of like, on that date. Yeah, but when will it finish? Well, on that date. And it kind of had quite an obvious conversation, and the person I was talking to didn't understand the concept of a sprint. They were asking the wrong question, and maybe I was being a little facetious in when will the content that went into that sprint be finished. Now that was a different conversation, but I wasn't really, I think at that time I wasn't really listening behind the question. And I have found as a difficulty with me with Agile is understanding that ability to report upwards when we will finish, because there's a case of we've got a number of items, we're pulling it down. When are you going to get it done? And the endemic thing I see in there is sort of pictures of a skeleton with a project manager waiting for someone to update the Jira ticket, kind of commentaries and things like that, which I have some empathy with, and I have empathy both sides, because if I didn't have to, and it's the usual conversation with anyone, if I didn't spend all my time updating the reporting system, I'd be able to get on and do the job. But by the same virtue, if you complete the job and don't report it as completed, no one knows it's completed, therefore it can't be used. It's pointless doing it. So it's kind of, but I think that's an endemic issue, isn't it?
I know a software company that's it's actually one of the founders is a very long time friend and client of mine. In fact, I've just written a short article that's going to appear, I think, in November edition of HR Director magazine. But it's more about how the organisation works and how they dealt with remote working and as being a virtual organisation and being agile. And they use Jira as well as various other bits of software, but they use Jira for all their development work. But they've kind of got to a point where they're quite slick at using it, and they use it as, because obviously everyone's been working at home. I mean, in point of fact, they've been a virtual organisation since they really started about 6 years ago. People do come in for major design meetings and stuff, but otherwise most people work from home. And so how do you performance manage people who are working from home? And the simple answer, well, it's not just relying on the tool, but the Jira tool was at the heart of that, because it provides visibly and non-intrusively. You've got a really, really good picture of how individuals are doing with the work that's allocated to them, or the work that, if they're grabbing, in many cases, they're saying, I've done this, it's tested, it's ready to go, and I'm grabbing this other bit now, and I should get on with this. So they use that as part and parcel of it's how they trust their people to work at home, because everyone's got fantastic visibility of progress and stuff. But I know in other organisations, it's the way it's implemented. It can seem a bit top heavy. So I've heard what you relate to me, I've seen again and again and again. So it's never an easy, simple solution. But that's one company that, at least at the scale they are at the moment, they've cracked it. If they get 10 times bigger, we'll see. I hope they do.
Yeah, I suppose where people have come from as well is that if you've got organisations where from day one that's the way things are done, then immediately that just becomes part of that. And if you're part of a team who is in a Scrum team, say for example, and you're the one that never updates the Jira tickets and everyone else does, the rest of the team are going to start quite quickly coming down on you, aren't they? And I suppose it's that thing, isn't it, of having, if you've got enough.
Yeah.
No, you won't. No. Yes, but if there's no consequences, then it's another thing you can avoid, because you can get on and do some other stuff, I suppose. It's an interest. The problem with agile and agility is it's such a huge can of worms, I think. We can talk about, because the things that come to my mind is around scaling it, and because that's my next one of my next areas of study for my own personal training, is kind of like how, as most of my work I do is program and portfolio management, and being able to understand the scaling of agile deliveries or agility delivery in an agile. Delivering with agility. There, I'm trying to get my words right. Yeah, delivering with agility within a team, but being able to manage that organisational need to understand when are we going to get what we need, when are we going to get our benefits, and have that forward view. Because sometimes they crash gears, don't they, on the fact that having that predictability of when you're going to get it, that in quotes you got with a waterfall model, in that you spent 2 years planning it, and then you know that in 6 months you'll get it. But quite often the plans you know the final plan the day before it goes live, really, because there's things moving around. So there was kind of, it's like a little comfort blanket, wasn't it, where you've got milestones that you're trying to aim, and you can put a RAG status on them. Whereas sometimes with the agility kind of approaches, you don't have that visibility of always when them things come out. But then I suppose when you talked about your one where you're saying, well, we're going to release this we're going to have this software built and parked here. It's how you. I think you said before about the just enough stuff, where it's kind of people go, when do you think you'll get it done by? Oh, I don't know. It's agile. It's kind of a response sometimes.
I think another thing that helps me is. And I have sometimes challenged a few folk on blogs around this, is when someone says I'm being agile, the question I ask is, what agile are you being, or what agile are you talking about?
I've seen you ask that question.
Because if someone says I'm being agile and I'm doing this, that, and the other, I'm saying, are you talking about software development? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, so we know this. And so, for example, then you can then go off and talk about scrums and goodness knows what else. If someone says, well, actually, I'm talking about how we do in the project, and then someone says, and then they start talking scrum language. Well, that's not right, because one is a software development approach, and the other one is a project management approach, and they're not the same thing. A simile I've sometimes used is bananas and oranges are both fruit. So if you like, bananas and oranges are both agile, but they look and taste completely different. And I've got a mate of mine who's allergic to anything citrus. So if I say to him, oh, can I get you some fruit? And he'll say, yeah, but don't get me anything citrus.
Yeah.
So, whereas if I say, I'm going to get some fruit, and I give him some fruit and it's an orange, then that's going to make him ill. So I've found it helpful myself to think about and to advise other people to think about when they're saying, I want to talk about agile, what agile are they talking about? And this only tends to be a problem when people are conflating software development agility and project management agility. I've talked to loads of people in other areas where agility is being used, in marketing and engineering, in product development, in construction, finance, and they don't have this confusion. But because, of course, so much IT development has been done within the wrap of a project or program for decades, the two seem intimately linked in the minds of people, and it can be difficult. But if folk can actually separate out and they say, well, what agile am I talking about? I'm talking about software development. That helps people separate in their mind, and they're not gonna then sort of confuse it. And one reason why that's important is around my other big soapbox thing, which is when people have written for years that Scrum is project management, and it isn't. And there's a really simple way to demonstrate and prove that it not just isn't, but it can't be.
Yeah. Where's the risk management? Where's the scope management?
Again, I've got a diagram in the book about that, and it shows a typical Scrum diagram, and then I stick it in the context of any old project, and there's so much more that a project will do, even if it's an IT-enabled project. It's not just producing software. What are you going to do with that software? Who's going to use it? Do they need training? You might even need to build an entire new computer center, or this, that, and the other. So there's all sorts of stuff that an organization has to do to be able to use the software that's being produced. And the project does all that stuff as well, gets all that stuff ready as well. So Scrum doesn't say anything about that. Scrum doesn't say anything about business cases or anything like that. So the only way to make agile software development methods look like project management is to make them look like project management and add in all the stuff that they're missing. But you come across the artworks of Heath Robinson, who produced drawings of amazing machines to peel potatoes and highly complex things. Scrum made into project management is a Heath Robinson drawing. It's just weird and wonderful, and it might work, but it'll work pretty terribly. And why would you? Why? When you've already got, oh look, Blue Peter like, here's a project management approach. Or if you want to do it agile, it's far easier to say, well, what does risk management look when it's done in an agile way? What does scheduling look when it's done in an agile way? What does leadership look like when it's done in an agile way, etc. That's much easier to do, and that's what this does.
That really, and it's kind of that's really, because it's really good, because we're kind of it's formulating in my head now what you're talking about, and it's something that it's kind of one of those things that's sat square with me, because people go, we're an agile project organisation, we're delivering things agilely as a project, and as you say, isn't what you need. What they're saying is, we're doing the engineering part of this project using agile or with agility or using Scrum, and even the test bit as well to some extent. It's the doing, not the organising and the managing that's being done. But then again, seeing that point that you just said there, is you can use those methods of agility and that approach of agility for the planning, for the risk management, because it's kind of I can see you could sit a wrapper around there. Risk management's a great one there for, I think, with that. You sit your wrapper around there and just go, right, okay, how are we going to manage risk? Right, here's our list of assumptions that we've got on our backlog. Great, so what tasks are we going to break them down? You could use Scrum to do risk mediation, but that's a way of doing it. Or you could use one of the complicated risk management toolings that you get out there. You could be sitting there with the lovely Agile poker cards that I've got sat on here to decide on how complex a risk might be, but it's all using the same tools and approaches, but not fixating on it being agile. It's fixating on what's the outcome that you want out of it.
So that's what I've tried to do for a few years now. I've tried to say, first of all, think about what you mean by when you're saying I'm being agile. If you're talking about software development, that's fine. There's loads of amazing stuff, wonderful stuff, that's had 20 odd years to describe and evolve what different kinds of, or adaptations of agile software development looks like. And that's just brilliant. But then if you're saying, well, actually, I want to do project management agility, right, forget the software development bit. Forget whatever development approach you are doing, and just think about the components of project management and what they look like when you apply the principles and the values in the Agile Manifesto to them. And I can give you an example around leadership that I use in the book, and I've described many, many times on courses or presentations and stuff. And there's two things here. First of all, great management professionals might usually have a particular management leadership style, but great professionals adapt their style to the needs of the project, of the organisation, of the moment. That's what professionals do. That is agility. But if someone says, well, okay, but generically, what's an agile leader look like? I'll say things. I'll give it perhaps a different slant on it. Now, for many years as a project professional, I was a control freak, and I got so stressed for so many years because I had to keep my finger on not just my pulse, but everyone else's. I had to be in absolute control. And then something called blood pressure came along, and I thought there's got to be a better way so that I don't die. So I started thinking, well, if I've got a team who are the right people to do, say, this work package, and they know how much time they've got, and they know the budget, the bit of the budget they're working within, and they know what they've got to produce, why don't I let them get on with it and just look over their shoulder, as opposed to being sitting in their laps all the time? And I liken it to a parent teaching their kid to ride a bike, and there comes that moment, the stabilizers are off, and there comes that moment when the parent takes their hand off the back of the saddle or off the back of the child, and the child goes a little bit wobbly, and then as they go a bit further, they're getting more stable, they're getting more confident, and they're cycling away on the two wheels. And that's great. But what's the parent doing? The parent is not having let go and then stood still, watching their child wobble or fall over or go to a holly bush or a dog or another child. They're kind of trotting along behind, keeping enough in touch so that they either intervene if they get a shout of mummy or daddy, or they think, there's a dog, I need to just sort of help, step in and help. That, I love that notion of agile leadership. It's it's what I call hands-off leadership. It's not letting the kid go away on the bike and, standing still and never doing anything and not being in a place where they can help. It's keeping in touch, but otherwise, if things are going fine, you don't need to intervene. Yeah. That, to me, is fabulous example of agile leadership.
I think it's really good. Yeah, really good. And I think the thing to build on that a little bit is, at times you, as a manager and a leader, you let go a little too far, and they'll fall over and graze their knee, kind of thing. Same as with the kid, but that's and that'll be a reflection of how far you step back, and also maybe the amount of coaching and training that the team need in order to avoid those things. And sometimes it's just bad luck, and that's it. And we've all got to learn a lesson sometime, isn't it? So I do like that analogy.
Absolutely. But what it also says is, leading a project is not just about the leadership style and the level of engagement, but it's then also around, shall we say, the process side of things. How are you actually measuring progress? So that hopefully, you'll get the feedback that enables you to say, I'm actually getting a bit too far away from this. I need to be closer to it because I can see things starting to go wrong. So it goes right back to the really great point and question you raised about being a bit agile. I do the same thing in sort of projects. Project management agility is in a project is about how you do all of the assurance. It's not just about leadership. It's not just about how you do scheduling. It's not just about how you do risk management. It's not just about how you manage stakeholders. But your agile project management approach should be holistic, and then should be linked in. That's the stuff inside the project, and then should be linked into what's happening outside. And that's where an organization needs to be prepared to modify its normal governance to support agile working. An APM, I was lucky to work with some great people on producing a short guide to, I think it's called Directing Agile Change, which is an APM guide to agile governance and everything, which I think is quite a good little piece.
Brilliant.
I don't get any royalties from that one.
I'm just scribbling now. You shouldn't be talking about other people's books, but and going back to your.
It's fine. I mean, I was co-author of that, and also the Agile Assurance a short guide as well.
So, I'm just thinking we've been. I knew we'd talk for a while on this.
We've been on for a long time. Yes.
Yeah, a good while, and I don't think we've scratched the surface yet, have we? in real terms. And
there's a lot in the book.
yeah, I was going to
Did I
say
mention
from a point. Yeah, you've mentioned the book. I'll mention it myself as well. And I've done my usual thing. I've started having a skim read of bits of it, start having to get a feel for it, as I always do with all of my interviewees. I say that I like to be dumb when I'm asking the questions on the interviews, and in some ways it's true, but in some ways it's just a little bit lack of prioritisation and time. But if there was,
I love asking the naive question. It's really powerful.
I hope, and again, that's what I try to do. It means I have to do less work, and I can be naive, and hopefully it'll do there. So that's I'm sticking with it. If people want, if people aren't convinced about understanding and thinking about why they should grab a copy of the book, what would your 2-second pitch for it to be? And I'll give you that chance to do that. And maybe if there's one section in it, if they decided, right, I only want to read one bit of it, which bit would you recommend reading?
Probably the early chapters that set the scene and explain the context, really, and the point, and the difference. About project management agility. The other thing I'd point people to is I've got on LinkedIn something called the Agile Beyond IT newsletter. So there's some nice bite-sized articles in there that take a lot of the themes that are in the book. So if people want to have some tasters, then take a look at those articles. Yeah.
Cool. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. Brilliant. And if people wanted to get in touch with you, have a conversation, what's the best place for them to get hold of you?
I think if they do it via LinkedIn, my contact details are there. I'm very happy to engage. Brilliant.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. It's been a fascinating and passionate talk, as I knew it would be.
Well, thank you, Nigel.
Yeah. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening.
Thank you very much indeed. Likewise, and Oswestry is a fabulous place. Excellent.
Yeah. Yes, everybody visit Oswestry. I don't get any commission for Oswestry. Thanks, Adrian.
Take care. Thank you very much once again.
And you. Bye.